of the law, the Pentateuch. And Leviticus has a certain rule that was in play. It was about lepers, people who had leprosy. And basically, they were supposed to cover their face like that. And they would announce to everyone around them, I'm unclean, stay away from me. And according to the law of Moses, he was supposed to be ceremoniously unclean, meaning that he could not enter the temple, he could not partake of any of those ceremonies, and he was pretty much ostracized. He was, asked to stay outside the camp, which was a very traumatic experience for somebody who got leprosy. People would typically get it through contact. It was very contagious. Leprosy is caused by a bacteria. And, so it was a very horrible thing to have. And it used to break up families to be torn apart. I don't know if you've seen this movie, Ben-Hur, and it's, shown very nicely over there how the mother and the sister of Ben-Hur actually got leprosy and they were actually thrown out of the camp. So with this background, I wanted to tell you a story. This is not a story. This is actually what happened in Jesus' time. A leper in Mark 1, chapter 1, a leper came to him and begged him, implored him. He knelt down to him and saying to Jesus, if you're willing, you can make me clean. Notice here, he's not asking for, if you're willing, you can heal me. He quoted the right thing because he was ceremoniously unclean. So yes, he had the disease of leprosy, but he was also unclean, meaning he could not partake of any of the temple rites. And so he's asking Jesus, and because of the law in those days, see, lepers would have to keep a long distance from whoever they're talking to. They're not allowed to talk to somebody. So this leper actually picked up the courage to talk to Jesus, and he kept distance. He says, Jesus, if you're willing, you can make me clean. And so he kept his distance. And so, if you notice this man being a leper, he would probably have been, he would have had a family, he would have had a farm, he would have had a roaring business. And one fine day he caught leprosy because of some contact from somebody else. And then he's thrown out of the city. He has to stay out. His wife has to drop him food every night, and then he's left to the elements. He can't build a house. He's staying out there in the open. That is the condition of this man. He's pretty much an untouchable in the society. And he's gone through a traumatic experience. Then Jesus moved with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched him. My goodness. Jesus touched him, but it wasn't even allowed for people to touch a leper. And he said to him, I'm willing, be cleansed. He didn't say be healed, he said be cleansed. And as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. I have highlighted two words here, touched and spoken. What happened first? Jesus touched him, right? But when did the healing come? The healing came after Jesus touched him when he spoke. So there was really no need for Jesus to touch him. So Jesus touched him while he was a leper. Jesus touched him while he was contagious and while he was unclean. You see, God sent his son to die while we were yet sinners. He didn't wait for us to become clean and perfect. And that is the character of God that Jesus is showing here. He says, I'm willing, be cleansed. And as soon as he had spoken, the leprosy left him. You see, what is the spoken? The spoken is the word. He sent out the word and it healed him. He could have done that in the first place. He could have just spoken and the leper would have been healed anyway. But you see, there's this compassionate aspect of Jesus that I wanted to convey to you. This compassion is reaching out to all of us. You might ask me, Sanjay, what's the relevance of this leper story? You know, we don't have lepers in our society. I mean, there's no leprosy around. So what's the relevance? Yes, I understand compassion. Yes, I understand Jesus heals, and there are lots of healings all across. Let me show you one thing that Jesus said again in his ministry. In Matthew 15, he says, "It's not that what goes into the mouth that defiles a man; it's what comes out of the mouth of man." And so Jesus is going on to explain in verse 18, whatever comes out from our heart through our mouth in what we speak, that is what defiles us. What is the meaning of defile? It means make unclean. Isn't it very similar to the leprosy kind of disease? It's the same thing. It makes you unclean before God. Verse 19, Jesus goes on to elaborate. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things that defile a man. So yes, there is the leprosy of the soul in our time and age. Let me take you to what a prophet Isaiah said about this aspect. He says in Isaiah 64, we all are like an unclean thing. And that unclean thing, he's referring to lepers and people with issues of blood and all that. He says, we are all like that. And all our righteousness, you might say, I'm righteous, I've got good deeds, this and that. He says, all our righteousness is like filthy rags before God. And there is no one who calls on your name who stirs himself up to take hold of you. Isn't that a sign of our times when everybody says I'm right, politically correct? You can't say I'm wrong. But you know what? God has a standard, and his standard is the absolute standard. And yeah, we're all sinners. Romans says that all have come short of the glory of God. We all are sinners. And only Jesus can make us whole. Only Jesus can make us clean. So our cry to Jesus, can it be, if you are willing, make me clean? I acknowledge that there are many times my mouth, what it has spoken, it has come out of my evil intentions of my heart. There is a verse in Jeremiah which says, the heart of man is deceitful above everything else, and out of it come up, the issues of life. What we speak defiles us. And so let us ask Jesus, our cry to Jesus, Jesus, make me clean, make me whole. Yes, while Isaiah talked about, this generation, there's no one who stirs himself up to reach out to God and ask for being made clean. Let me take you to another story. This was where Jesus touched the leper. I'll take you in another story which you've already heard, and you probably already heard several sermons about it. It's about the lady who touched Jesus, right? Let's go into that. But I want to give you a little background before we get into that story. It's from Mark 5:25. Now, in those times, if a woman had a discharge of blood for many days, other than the time of a customary impurity, and if it runs for a very long time, then she shall be unclean. Verse 26 says, every bed she lies on all the days of her discharge shall be impure. Whatever chair she sits on shall be unclean. And whoever touches the things that she touches shall be unclean. How dreadful is that? And they have to go through an elaborate cleansing ceremony to purify themselves. And so imagine the fate of these women who just had the issue of blood, and it's not stopping. Something is wrong in their body, but they were treated as unclean. And as a result of which, it could affect them at any age, starting from the age of 13 or 14 and going all the way up to 40, 50. At any point, they could enter this phase, and they had to leave society. They had to live separately. It was a very traumatic experience. We can actually relate to that because we are in 30, 40 days of isolation, 2 months, and we are kind of feeling the pain of it. But these women have had to go through it for years and years and leave their families, leave their brothers and sisters, not be able to get married. The whole thing, the whole life is a shambles for them. With this backdrop, I'd like to share with you Mark chapter 5, verse 25. There was a certain woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years. Now, that automatically tells you it connects to that law of Leviticus, where she had to keep herself separate, very much like lepers, very similar to lepers. If you read Numbers 5, lepers and women or anybody with any issue were the same, treated the same. And they had to leave the camp. They had to stay outside the city. And she had suffered many things from many doctors. She had spent all that she had, her entire life savings, whatever she's earned the hard way, or whatever she's had by from her parents, she spent it all. And she didn't get better, but she rather grew worse. Think about it. Somebody who's losing blood, somebody who's drained of blood, what are they going to look like? Pale, anemic. They're going to feel very weak, sluggish. They be wanting to lie down all the time. They can't get married. They are absolutely depressed. They are in the pits, right? And it's absolutely not a happy situation. So she had heard about Jesus. Remember, she's been like that for 12 years, and Jesus has come on the scene maybe 2 years, right? But for 10 long years, no hope. Then she hears about Jesus and she says to herself, maybe that is my answer. But how do I get in front of this holy man of God? I'm not allowed to touch people. I'm not allowed to go in public. How am I going to go there and ask for healing? So she's tossing and turning. She week in, week out, she thinks about a plan to devise a strategy. And she thinks about it. She says, oh, I can't approach him while he's teaching. Maybe I can do something on the sly. And so she makes all those plans. She's thought it over very carefully because she's desperate. She's really desperate, and she's worked out a strategy. She's worked out a plan to solve her problem. So when she heard about Jesus, she came behind him. Obviously, she won't come in front of him because she's impure. And by law, she cannot even be in that crowd. In fact, if people find out that she's having an issue, they will actually stone her. They will actually pelt stones till she runs away and leaves the city. That is the risk that she was taking. So she goes behind him, and Jesus is actually walking with the crowd on his way to heal Jairus' daughter. So the whole crowd is moving. There are people shoving and touching, and it's a big crowd. And in that movement, she actually finds a way, touches a lot of people, and she finds a way. She says, if only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. She had so much faith because she's seen people being healed by Jesus. So, in her own mind, she's worked it out. People are getting unclean because they touch me. Why will I not get clean if I touch him? That is her logic, right? But she's doing it illegally because it is against the law. But she's worked it out. You know what? I'm going to touch him and I'm going to run. And he won't know it. I'll be healed. End of story. That was the plan, right? Immediately, as soon as she touched his garment, she just touched it. She didn't even pull it. She just touched it. And the fountain of blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of affliction. That picture I've drawn there is essentially it's tulips and it's a blue sky. All that depression, all that sickness, suddenly she's a new creation. That touch of divinity has come into her, touched her. Her skin is glowing. She's looking at her hands. They've suddenly become rich in color. She's feeling like dancing and singing on the spot. She's thinking her future is open before her. She can get married. She can have children. She can go and talk to her friends. She can enjoy their children. She's in this little time capsule of a few seconds. She's enjoying. She's locked up in that bubble. She's dreaming to herself. The crowd is moving on, and for a few seconds, she's enjoying it. Little does she know that that dream is going to stop, because Jesus stopped. Jesus was going and he stopped because he felt something, that some power has left him. And he turned around. He didn't look on the side, he turned around. He looked behind him and he says, "Who touched my clothes?" And he said that angrily. Who touched my clothes? Because it is done illegally. I felt sin. And the law is saying, no, this cannot happen. Right? His disciples said, what are you saying, Jesus? There are people touching you. There are people pushing you. There are people, all around you. And you're saying, who touched me? Listen to this carefully. Many people touch Jesus every day. In this church situation, 20, 30 people, we all are touching Jesus. Why are we touching his word? We're all touching. But this lady, she comes for a few seconds to he's not even teaching. He's walking, he's moving. She touches him for 1 second and she gets something. The crowd has been there with him for hours, touching him, skin to skin maybe, and pushing and all that. Didn't get anything. She got something. What is the difference? What is, does it talk to you? Does it tell you something about crowds touching Jesus and one person touching Jesus with an intention, with such a strong faith and an expectation? That too from behind, Jesus, don't even look at me. You keep going, keep doing your work. I'll just touch. That's all. And I'll go away. I'll run from here. That's it. Jesus turns around. Why? Because heaven connected to this touch. Heaven did not connect to all the pushing and shoving. Connected to one touch, a touch of faith. And Jesus, he looks around and you think he didn't know. He looks at this lady, she's glowing. She's got health. She's got that glow, the whole Shekinah glory of God on her. She's shining. She's got her hair is glowing. Her hair is, full of health. And there's a joy inside of her. And he could see out of all the people, that one stands out. She is like glowing with the glory of God. And he looks at her. That look could have been a look of accusation. What kind of look would it have been if it was a Pharisee? If it was a high priest from the temple? Or even if it was an ordinary human being, a man who's just following Jesus? Right? But he turned around and looked around to see her. And what happens to this woman? Fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, she came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. What changed? She was planning to touch and run. That was her worldly plan. You see, but when God comes into your heart, the reverence, the fear of God, it takes precedence. Because that point you realize this is divinity. And you have got something from divinity. Fear of God, reverence of God, the love of God, the divine healing, it's all coming to you. It doesn't matter now if people stone her. With fear and trembling, she knows that she's been healed. And she came down and fell before him. You know what she could have done? Even when he looked at her, she could have kept running and she could have kept going and said, oh, he didn't say anything and I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to tell him, I'm going home. I got my healing. Bye. No, God's come inside her. Transformation has taken place. And she told him the whole truth. You know what? The first experience when we get to touch Jesus is confession. We confess and we say, cleanse me. Right? So I wonder, I mean, you know how the story ended. It could have ended in a very bad way. It could have ended with Jesus condemning her and saying, you just broke the law, girl. You just broke the law and now you're finished. Like you were not clean and now you're like double unclean. What did he say? Daughter. Right? First thing he says is daughter. Why? Because Abraham is the father of faith. She demonstrated the same faith that Abraham had. And now she's a daughter of Abraham. She's a daughter of Abraham. God says she's my daughter. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. He said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Why peace? Because she's broken the law. If the full weight of the law is thrown at her, she doesn't stand a chance. It's by grace that she gets it. Go in peace. You have nothing to hide now. I know, he says. So that's why he's called the Prince of Peace. That's why he's called the Everlasting Father. And the Prince of Peace only can give peace. And then he says, be healed of your affliction. Yes, she had got something in the first pass. It is the confession later on that sealed it. It's the confession that says, Lord, I messed up. And I can't hide anywhere. I can go to the depths of the sea. I will not still be able to hide. You see all things. You see inside me. And now you are inside of me. You can see everything. I have nothing to hide. I confess. So she was healed of her affliction in the soul. She got the body healing, but now she got the soul healing. And she can go back to her family, to her home, in this full assurance that she's reconciled to the Father, that she will go there with, one day and meet him face to face, and he will say, daughter, well done, your faith has made you whole. So in conclusion, we saw just one touch. He touched the leper, she touched him. What is the common thing over there? A compassionate God, a God who does not put any conditions, a God who doesn't throw the whole weight of the law against us, a God who says, you've come, you've asked, I'll give it. I'm willing. Be cleansed. You were doing it in your own way. Let me show you the right way. Go in peace. Daughter, your faith has made you well. I don't know about you, but is there any one of you who wants to step out from the crowd and who wants to touch Jesus with an intent to say, Jesus, I have waited very long for this. Prodigal sons, daughters, my brothers or sisters, people you've been praying for many years, some health issue, provision, some visa issue, touch him. Think about it. Don't just make every church gathering a crowd gathering.
Mm.
Touch him. Because even in this quarantine situation, it's you and him. It's your touch. It's
Mm.
his touch. And he's interested in the one. And he will do it. He says, I'm willing. I'm willing, he says. So I will close now. I'll ask Ash to or Sonia to take up in prayer, stirring up your faith to reach out and touch Jesus. On this Mother's Day and connecting with Sonia's prayer, where the prayer is for your children. But I want to extend that. There are many of you in isolation, living in little bubbles of helplessness, living in little bubbles of mediocrity and procrastination, or just fighting a certain addiction. Touch Jesus.
Mm.
This is your day. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thanks.